Welcome back, nerds. Fino here. 2025 was a real blood-sucking gauntlet when it came to powerhouse servants. But will this year be any more merciful? To answer that, I've picked out the 10 strongest servants, at least for my money. But if you're trying to save cash this year, I've got great news. We're starting off with number 1. There is only one servant that I would consider a must-roll for this year, and it's Arquade's second least favorite person to spend an afternoon with, the Curry Monster CL. On her own merits, CL is a single-target Buster Moon Cancer with an extremely broken skill. She can set your current hand to only consist of her cards. In a main attacking role, you can pair this with Summer BB and 2 Skies of Light to have a guaranteed NP Buster Brave Chain for 3 turns. Between CL's own charge per turn effect and Skies' flat charge on using Buster cards, you're guaranteed 100% of her meter as long as you don't overshoot and kill the only valid target on the field with her NP. But even if you don't aim for perpetual motion, CL can still use this interaction to perform some really strange clears against 90++ farming nodes. Normally, regular card-based strategies suck for farming due to the inherent inconsistency of card RNG. But because the CL-BB combo is 100% consistent, you can have CL clear both huge single-target and small AoE waves. The latter by disjointing her chain with something like a Buster-NP Buster combo, so she repeatedly selects the next valid target. It's not a universal strategy, and it has a learning curve, but you'd be surprised what you can get away with if you're willing to get creative. In the main attacker role, you'll want NP5. As a Moon Cancer, CL can't count on class advantage in most fights, so squeezing out neutral damage is essential. But what if I told you that CL's indispensable even at NP1? For this application, all you need to do is press her third skill to stack the deck with her cards, and then swap her out for your real main attacker. Due to swap mechanics, all of CL's cards, which now make up your entire hand, are replaced by those of the inbound servant, like say Kukul Khan or even Super Orion for example. You can use this general approach to farm too, though it's not as flexible as having CL up front, since you're down a swap. But here's Typhon doing exactly that. Where this swap interaction is the most broken though, is in fights that you can resolve on the first turn, the 2 major categories being raids and Grand Servant duels. Unless I'm farming a specific material on the Bleached Earth, the latter is still my primary use of Storm Pods, even after farming all the Grand Servant specific currency. Because of monotype restrictions, CL is only usable an extra 1, but she's a godsend for both Flare and Grand Marie. Turns out having guaranteed access to a Mighty Chain or a Buster Brave Chain for your main attacker, yeah, that lets you get away with a lot of shit that would have been too high rolly to be practical otherwise. Now if you've read ahead, you might be thinking, what about you, Olga? She comes a year later, but you're gonna want at least 1 copy of her too, because she can also rig your hand while filling that niche for the extra 2 category. But enough about next year. With CL out of the way, all the other servants coming out this year are what I'd call choose-your-own-adventure picks. While some are outstanding and even encroach on the current power picks, none of them are such overwhelming upgrades or have such essential utility that you have to roll for any of them. A couple are nice to have just in case, but if you already have a heavily invested option in their role, you shouldn't feel the need to flog Mr. Credit Card. My number 2 pick is everyone's favorite waifu, Space Ereshkigal. She's the anniversary servant for this year, and instead of being strict power creep over a competition in the Zerctoria sense, Eresh makes her name by being almost universally usable. She's multi-core superglue. First of all, her class interactions work differently than her predecessor Draco. Eresh is neutral against all standard classes, including Berserkers, but gains bonus damage against most extra-class servants, not Avengers or Beasts though. This means that she only has one really bad matchup against a very rare class, Avenger, so she can slot in as the AoE component of virtually any multi-core team. To further this role, her first skill gives a package of attack, NP damage, and 20% charge across your entire frontline. Its cooldown is also such that, in combination with any external source of cooldown reduction, a specific servant or the Atlas uniform, she can cast it on both turns 1 and 3. This is assuming ideal conditions and access to a Pen 5, but still, that's a lot of resources for an attacker to give both to herself and other attackers. She also has a unique mechanic, a per-battle affection system where some of your actions can raise her affinity. Her NP scales according to this affection level. This means that she has startup time, but gains power and additional effects the longer a fight goes on. Invuln Pierce, Ignore Defense, and even a 50 startup at max affinity. For challenge quests that require you to be in prolonged contact with multiple enemies, you can hit critical mass and overpower what's left by the time you get your second wind. One very notable reason to get your own Eresh is that this mechanic is only active when you're Space Ereshkigal's owner, so friend supports are significantly weaker at comparable NP levels. All that said, Space Aresh tends to do less upfront damage than her rival AoEs, especially compared to some or Ibuki Doji, so you may find yourself struggling in the early waves of a fight unless you're extremely heavily invested into her. And if you've already committed hard to a different AoE Ultra Generalist, the added flexibility from getting Space Aresh Kaggle isn't necessarily worth the expense of bringing her up to speed. But if you're relatively new, then by all means go apeshit. Space Aresh is a great building block for your account. Just make sure to budget out 900 quartz to pity CL before you go all in. At number 3 is Lohi. She's a general pull AoE Quick Berserker coming this Christmas. While you'd normally expect a servant with that description to be nothing special, they throw a pretty big curveball with Lohi. She has both ramping NP gain and NP damage on her Noble Phantasm, and what's even crazier is that these effects splash onto her teammates. Combined with a personal 80% battery that gives 20 to her teammates, and you have a remarkably flexible attacker. In combination with an appropriate number of Scotties, she can wreck shit in single core. But the fact that she kinda shits buffs everywhere makes her a powerful multi-core tool as well. On top of everything else, her Quick and Buster buffs are also party-wide, so depending on the composition you want to run, she can actually shine above your alternatives. If you're flush with quartz around the time of her first banner, she's a great pickup for those of you trying to build up your account's strength. Though the obsessive gacha addicts among you may be dissuaded by her general pool status, which lets her hypothetically appear on any banner. One last and strange aspect of Lohi is that one of her skills applies the Darkness Terrain. Largely irrelevant, given how few servants interact with this mechanic, and most of them are AoEs to boot. But there is one waifu who can put it to some slight use. And what do you know? She's our number 5. Number 5? Yeah, I know I just pulled the pin on that grenade, but I'm gonna keep that clenched while number 4 makes her entrance. Kazura Drop is an AoE Quick Alter Ego and the penultimate member of the Sakura 5. No word on where Violet is yet. KD's big gimmick is that she can target an enemy, copy their class, and through one of her passives, gain bonus damage against that same class, 75%. This makes her a viable threat against both monotype farming waves and AoE bosses, though if there are multiple classes of similar health values, you may run into some trouble. Kazura Drop also has a neat interaction with the Sakura 5 and BB. If one is present on the field, aside from the unit that casts this skill, KD gets an additional 50% charge per Sakura. But again, this only applies to the extrovert Sakuras, not Kama, Parvati, or Durga. Oh, and by the way, this skill has a guaranteed 50% battery built in. What this means is that a team of 2 Kazura Drops can give each other 100% batteries. She also has an extremely nasty debuff package that nerfs both quick resistance and crit resistance, and then gets around one of the major weaknesses of debuff-reliant farmers by having this effect recur at the start of the next 2 turns. And if 2 Kazura Drops use this at the same time? Ooh. KD's not exactly my go-to attacker, but from my experience using her, I'd say she has a very cool and unique playstyle that, when everything comes together, you can shit all over enemies. But you have all these conditions you have to fulfill. Firstly, you really want 2 Kazura Drops, meaning you have to dig through your support list past all the Oberons and Summer Scotties. Secondly, you'd either want a single class enemy node, or one where you can copy one to gain class advantage against another. Thirdly, for boss fights specifically, they can't be debuff immune or purge your buffs. That's a lot of conditions, and while I don't doubt Kazura Drop's ability to get the job done once you meet them, it's kind of a pain and I usually don't feel like it. She's the definition of a choose-your-own-adventure servant. Now back to number 5. Phantasmoon is from this year's second Christmas event. Yes, we get 2, though this one pulls double duty as a New Year's event. Phantasmoon herself is a single-target Buster Pretender. Single-target Pretenders are incredibly rare, and in a sense, you can treat Phantasmoon as a premium upgrade from Hephaestion. While useful, Faker really boils down to a class and a card type without a lot of flexibility, unless you need to rough up some casters while you're fighting alter egos at the same time. Phantasmoon, by contrast, has a strange but very flexible combination of effects. Notably, she has a party-wide attack skill and a separate 30% battery that comes with NP damage and overcharge. This makes her much more usable in multi-core setups. She has anti-evil on her overcharge. That's relevant for 90++, but she also has a bunch of effects that are only really useful when bosses or CL swaps get involved. First of all, NP seal from her Noble Phantasm. Secondly, she has a skill that makes her extra cards hit as an AoE, and her NP also buffs her extras for good measure. Thirdly, she has crit star manipulation and can choose a recipient for this effect. A fun package of tricks, though I personally have found myself using her as a beat stick more than anything else. But if you're feeling adventurous or you really hate alter egos, Phantasmoon does have what it takes to hold her own. But what about that Darkness Terrain? Oh, it's a small thing really. Phantasmoon is a passive that gives her rainbow buff effectiveness when it's up, 20% a pop, which is not insignificant, but given that Lohi is the only darkness setter in the game, it's only worthwhile in multi-core farming. Like you wouldn't give up an extra charger to fit Lohi in if you were fighting a single target boss. Number 6. Yui Shosetsu. I've talked at length about her in a servant guide recently, but the TLDR is that she gives party charge and is an NP that gives buffs based on the different card type effects a servant has. Quick gives attack, Arts gives crit damage, and Buster gives NP damage. She herself can provide the Arts buff in that equation, by the way. This is great in combination with servants that have their own Quick, Buster, or Rainbow buffs, or in combination with the Ox Demon King CE. In this list, we've already seen one powerhouse attacker that can give both Quick and Buster buffs to the entire party, so I think you can see the potential for abuse. You guys will hear scuttlebutt about Summer Tiamat competing with her, but you're comparing a 4-star and a 5-star, and for supplementary buffers like Shosets, that actually does make a huge difference. Yui is much easier to fit into a full team composition due to the cost difference. You don't absolutely need her for anything, but I'd try and fish for a copy if you're the type to do daily disappointment rolls. She scales off NP levels, but I wouldn't sweat that too much for casual usage. That said, her initial banners are not ones you should go apeshit on. Number 7. Aoko Awazaki. Aoko is a transforming foreigner who needs to NP once to become a real threat. She's like if Jekyll didn't suck. She also expands on Lost Belt 7 Yu Olga's mechanics by having AoE Buster and extra cards. Though without stacks of her special buff, their damage is shockingly anemic. Mostly relevant for popping these stack-based protection effects in large-scale battles or removing low HP cannon fodder. As Super Aoko, she has both Invuln Pierce and Defense Ignore on an AoE Arts attack. This property is actually really useful, and Aoko has been my go-to for fights that force you to fight a wide variety of enemy types on top of either protection effect. There have been multiple challenge quests last year on JP where Aoko was unironically like a top 2 option for me. That said, you can maybe think of another servant that also has a combo of Invuln Pierce and Defense Ignore, Space Ereshkigal. If you still need an Ultra Generalist farmer, you're better off throwing in your lot with Eresh. The need to transform makes Aoko generally impractical for farming, but Aoko does have situational advantages elsewhere. Again, her AoE cards let her wear down stacks and large numbers of trash mobs. Her anti-protection effects are available the turn after she transforms, versus Eresh who needs to build Affinity to get them, and of course Aoko performs better in fights with a heavy presence of Berserkers, her preferred prey, or Avengers who Space Eresh can't contest. Aoko doesn't mechanically break the game the same way that someone like Bazette does, and her unique effects are indeed more gimmicky than busted, but the properties on her NP alone are really strong and worth an element of consideration. Number 8. BB Dubai. Beeb 3 can switch between NP types. By default, she's an Arts AoE with Anti-Heaven and Anti-Star power mods. This also does bonus damage against a trait that BB herself can apply. But when she activates her battery, she gets the option to change it to a non-damaging arts card that gives party invulnerability and debuff immunity for a single turn. It also charges allies who have a trait that, again, BB herself can apply. 30% at overcharge 1. What this means is that BB actually has a backup plan if your run falls short. If the tide turns, you can swap her to GGG, her defensive NP, and hold out until your other servants get their second wind. She's decent as a main attacker, but I'd say this flexibility of hers really shines from the backline. In high threat encounters, you may lose your actual main attacker or a secondary support to boss aggro. Then, when BB enters the field, you can choose to run her as a replacement attacker or support. Your CE choice is going to be a bit rough if it's not the one you're expecting, but at least you have a fighting chance. Luckily, her other skills can work in both roles. One is a party arts buff and 20% battery, while the other is an AoE buff purge with an absolutely unreal 100% attack debuff. So even as an attacker, she can potentially nullify an enemy NP turn. It's an interesting proposition, but I lean against putting her higher for 2 reasons. One is that Space Eresh, our boogeyman for the year, is usually more enticing for multi-core farming. The second, and more consequential for me, is that Arts teams already have the single strongest defensive engine in the game, their primary support Castoria. So switching to BB's GGG often seems either redundant because your Castorias are alive, or desperate because they're not. Number 9. The Count of Monte Cristo. Dantes 2 is a single-target quick avenger, finally bringing my ancient prophecy to realization. Most of his power is concentrated on that noble phantasm. It's got preemptive Invuln Pierce, a damage that scales off the burn stacks of your target, and an extremely high chance to stun. I'll also point out that Edmund has a skill that lets him apply burn stacks on his regular cards. And of course you could just give him burn command codes to have a consistent source. So under ideal conditions, you can spam his noble phantasm turn after turn, stacking burns while your target is stun locked. When it works, you're absolutely dumpstering your opposition. But Monte Cristo's charge needs add a fair bit of normal card RNG to this strategy. Not to mention a lot of the bosses that you really want to stunlock are debuff immune. Losing the stunlock is bad enough, but not being able to stack burns is catastrophic. Compare this to someone like Van Gogh, who also has an infamous stun lock. You wouldn't want to run something like Double Go against debuff immune enemies, but remember that she can at least buff herself to go on the offensive. Dantes does not have a good plan B by comparison. Again, if you have a strong copy, you'll absolutely be able to ruin certain enemies. Play with your food like Johnny 3 Ushis. But in a strategic sense, I consider Monte Cristo more of a fun servant than one that expands the capabilities of your roster in a significant way. For the last slot, I had a choice to make. I asked myself, who would Cock Robin pick? Then I turned 180 degrees and went with the other option. Shizuki Sojiro is the welfare servant for the Mahoyo crossover, meaning he's not gacha relevant, but his skill set is significant enough that I'd be doing you all a disservice by not including him. He's a single target buster berserker and he has two very notable properties. Firstly, he has a skill that multiplies his current NP meter. While you could do funny overcharge shit with this in K-Scope, the practical effect is that you only need to get him to 50% charge externally. With a Pen 2, you only need to find 30, whether from your Craft Essence, Castoria, or some other servant. Even more consequentially, Sojiro's Noble Phantasm kills him on activation. This means he's a single target Arash/Habitrot. And remember, he's a berserker. Against single early enemy waves, he can destroy the obstacle, destroy himself, and let another servant rotate in. This is a potentially significant addition to your roster. But if I'm going to put him on the list, why so low? Well, the main issue for me is that despite his hypothetical power, I find myself not using him a lot. Some of it is that I'm brain rotted from years of Arquade and Chenggong abuse, but more relevant to the rest of you, that 30% external charge requirement can be a real pain in the ass. If you aren't running an arts arrangement for the rest of your team, you don't necessarily want to run Castoria as a support. And you also don't want to dilute the efficiency of your farming team by giving him a starting charge CE, unless you're in a lotto or other type of event that has one. So practically speaking, you'd want to run one or more servants that splash charge, which is doable but clunky at the amount he wants. In other words, he's offensively more flexible than someone like Habitrot, but the conditions for his deployment are much more restrictive. Either your team building gets harder, or you lose efficiency in the CE department. Maybe things will turn around by the time I get to his servant guide. I can try some more esoteric strategies, but this is where I've been at with Sojiro up to this point. He's like the wallet condom of FGO. Better for him to be there and go unused, than for you to need him in his absence. With all that said, is there a servant you'd have put on this list? Or are you going to go off the beaten path for one of the more jank waifus this year? By the by, I stream over on Twitch every weekend, 3 PM Pacific time, Friday through Sunday, though I dabble in Wednesdays too. Twitch.tv/Finotaisen. So if you're around, stop by and you might be surprised by what I'm playing. See you there.